A very good evening, students, and a very warm welcome to Malhotra IAS. Today is Saturday, and we'll be taking up the current affairs of this week. And in our agenda, we have three topics that have been lined up for today's class. The first article that we'll be taking up is the tribal life expectancy, which is said to be reduced, and it is in this article which has been published. This article says that the life expectancy of the tribal people, especially the scheduled tribes in India, their life expectancy is 4 years lower than the general population, right? That is the first article. And the second article we'll be talking about is 50 years of Stockholm, and tomorrow is World Environment Day. As tomorrow it is 50 years since the start of the Stockholm conference, which has taken place in the year 1972. So in this context, we should be analyzing the India and the climate change challenges, how we are tackling, and at the same time we'll also be looking into the timeline since 1972 say later till date, especially with respect to climate change. What are the organizations that have been developed, and what steps, what hazards have we gone through, and the future hazards which we are going to face. And lastly, there's a fact related article, that is world's largest plant, which is now came into light, and it is said that this is a polyploid. Right, we'll be trying to understand what is a polyploid, and with respect to examination, some locational aspects we'll be dealing into, right? So let's quickly move into our article. See, this is an article which has been published in the Down to Earth, and especially it is also being listed in the Indian Express, and the ministry recently gave a report, and in that report also it has been mentioned that the scheduled tribes, their age is life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy at birth means when they are born, if considering the same mortality rate, if it is prevailed, then what is the lifetime of that particular person? That is called life expectancy, and it is said that it is 4 years lower than the average general population. And there is also news regarding the population distribution and life expectancy with respect to other communities also. So we'll be dealing with this. So quickly, before we move any further, let me give you a brief regarding this article, right? And there has been also a case study. We'll also be looking into that case study, right? Now we should ask first ourselves, before we move into this article, who exactly is a tribe? Can you define who exactly is a tribe in India, and where is the tribe as a person or a tribe as a community defined in the Indian Constitution, right? We know that there are many special provisions, there are many definitions, but where exactly is the tribe that has been defined? See, firstly, Article 342 of the Constitution, which is based on the characteristics such as primitive traits या geographically isolated conditions अगर है, या distinct culture हो, and if there is some community of people who have been staying away from the normal public and who has economically backward, on these parameters a community called tribes have been defined in, especially in the Article 342. So let us quickly read what exactly this article says. See, this article tells you that the scheduled tribes under Article 342 of the Constitution, which is based on the characteristics, there are certain characteristics to be considered a particular community as a tribal community. Now what are those characters? They have been listed here. The first character, if you see here, it is a primitive traits hona chahiye. That community need to have a primitive trait, that means old traits. They are still following the older traditional methods for their survival. And secondly, they should be geographically isolated. They should be staying away, mean they have their own geography, right? And they are isolated from the normal public, right? Apart from that, they should have a distinct culture. Okay? They should have a distinct culture and shyness of contact with communities at large. More or less, if you see any community with respect to tribal areas, they are mostly detached from the mainstream society. If not, today with the advancement of the government interventions, tribal communities are coming ahead and they are also moving in the leading areas. So the other trait of the scheduled tribes is that they should have a shyness in contact with the community at large. And lastly, there should also be economically backward class, and they should also be considered as economically backward. Now, what happens when a particular community is labeled as a scheduled tribe? So, if at all a person is called an SC or a person is called ST, or if a person belongs to another community, what difference does it make? See, whenever a particular community or a particular person is enlisted into the scheduled tribes, it has certain special provisions in the Constitution of India. Now, what are those special provisions? We'll be looking at it in the next couple of minutes. But see, whenever a particular community is labeled as scheduled tribes, then that particular community will be entitled to some kind of constitutional protections, and developmental programs will be enlisted, right? So, we'll now be looking into what are the constitutional provisions that have been enlisted, that have been enshrined to give the scheduled tribal community in India. Firstly, let us look into the constitutional aspects of scheduled tribes, and then we'll discuss this article in detail, because this need to be certain background you need to be aware of, right? If you know any article, or if you are aware of any of the special provisions in the Constitution that are enshrined for the scheduled tribes, please comment it down. Firstly, if you look into the Constitution, Article 15, okay, what I am going to write here, these are all special provisions which are meant for scheduled tribes, right? Now, what is the difference between scheduled tribe and a scheduled caste? This has been a question which has been asked by Amulya Agarwal. We'll be coming to that after some time, right? There are definitions that have been defined in the Constitution itself, right? There is specially definitions that are defined. Okay, we'll come to that in some time. Now, there is Article 15(5), Article 16 also gives certain provisions to the protection of the scheduled castes, that is Article 16(4)(a). Apart from that, Article 17, Article 46, Article 17, untouchability, Article 46 too. What is Article 46? If you can comment it down, it would be great, right? If you are aware of Article 46, please let me know. I'll be explaining you even the Article 46 also. Article 164, Article 330, right? Article 330, Article 332, 335 and 334. Right? Now, where is the definition of scheduled tribes mentioned? That is mentioned in the Article 334. Okay? Article 334, even Article 338 also, there are some special provisions that have been given. Apart from that, Article 338A, 339, 330, 341. Now, here and here, there are special provisions that are given for the reservations with respect to the legislative assembly, parliament, and in certain local panchayat areas, right? So, whatever the articles which you see here, they are all give protections in one or the other form to the scheduled tribal community. Article 342. Apart from that, you also have Schedule 5 and Schedule 6. There is Schedule 5 also, Schedule 6 also. Schedule 5 deals with scheduled areas, right? And Schedule 6 deal with Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, which takes care of special provisions which are enlisted in the Constitution for the tribal community in the AMTM, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram, right? Clear? See, Article 15(5), Article 16, Article 17, these are part of your fundamental rights. ये आपका fundamental rights है, right? So fundamentally Article 15, 16 and 17, they give protection to the scheduled tribal community in one or the other way. One with respect to their discrimination and other with respect to the reservation in terms of jobs and preventing the untouchability as well. Right? When it comes to Article 161, it gives the tribal affairs ministers, tribal affairs, it talks about the tribal affairs in Odisha, Chhattisgarh and some other states. So I have given you the list of this entire article so that we can understand what are the protections that are given in the constitutions so that the tribal community can be protected in one or the other way, right? With this, let us also look into another aspect with respect to the population distribution of the tribal community in India. Which state do you think has the highest population percentage with respect to their population in the states which are considered as scheduled tribes? If you see, the state of Arunachal Pradesh has somewhere around 68.8% of the total population considered as scheduled tribes, right? Scheduled tribes. Now, with such large population, do you think that these scheduled tribes are mentioned in the Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram of the Schedule 6 Act? Schedule 6 mein your Arunachal Pradesh is not, but it has 68% of the total population as tribes. Apart from that, if there is largest population, if you see, it is generally found in Odisha and Madhya Pradesh, right? Odisha and Madhya Pradesh has population wise there is large number, but if in terms of the protection, sorry, if in terms of the population percentage, then it is 68.8% with Arunachal Pradesh, and we also have Nagaland has 86%, 86.5%, Mizoram too has 94.4%, right? Meghalaya also has 86%. Now that is the reason why, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, which has highest number of population in terms of tribes, they are given protection in the Scheduled Tribes Act, that is scheduled tribes in the Schedule 6, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, right? You have to understand the gravity of this, particularly Schedule 6, right? Clear? Now, in spite of these many constitutional provisions which are given to the scheduled tribes, there is a recent article that has come up stating that the life expectancy of the scheduled tribes in India is said to be 4 years lower than the average general Hindu population. So let us quickly look into the population aspects and their life expectancy in terms of male and female since 1997 to 2000 and till the recent data that have been taken by, right? Now look into this article here. Okay, this article says that there is a research institute for compassionate economics. Okay, research institute for compassionate economics. This has given a research study, and this research study has said that the life expectancy of tribes in India is 4 years lower than the average Hindu population. Now we'll understand little more facts here. We'll see the facts first and then move little ahead. Okay, look here. See, this is the female population and this is the male population. This is based on the 2011 census, and it is also based on the annual survey of health, Ministry of Family and Welfare. It gives yearly every now and then, and the last survey which has been given in the year 2010 and 2011, this has been taken on this basis along with the National Family Health Survey. The data is taken and this graph has been plotted. They have come to a conclusion that the life expectancy of the tribal people, especially if you see the grey color here, it is ST. Back in 1997 to 2000, the life expectancy was 57 years, but now especially this is with respect to females. Look at in the 2013 to 2016 data, the life expectancy from 57 it has raised to 68. Now we have to understand why is there an increase, right? Why is there an increase? And if you look again, this is with respect to male population, the scheduled tribes with respect to male, it was 54.5 years of life expectancy when they are born, and this has risen to 64.4 in the year 2013, right? 54 से लेकर 62 with males, and in the females 57 से लेकर 68 तक, ठीक है? There is a drastic change in the life expectancy. We have to understand, especially for mains examination, why is there a change? And the other pattern, if you look forward here, the other pattern, which is the average life expectancy of a forward caste person is 72.2 years, but look at the scheduled tribes, that is 68. Now there is a gap of 4.2 years. We have to question why as well. We have to question why. This is for females, and if you look for the males, it is SC is 62.4, and for normal general population it is 69. Now there is a gap of almost 7 years, right? There is a gap of 7 years in male population. Again, you have to question why. And if you look into another anomaly, why is the female population life expectancy is more as compared to the male population's life expectancy? Why do we have female population life expectancy more, and why do we have male population life expectancy less? So these are the three questions one need to answer. These are the three questions one need to answer in order to understand the dynamics of the scheduled tribes in India, right? Firstly, see, there is a data, that is Ministry of Union Health and Family Welfare Annual Health Survey report on this. It has given data for the 9 states which has been given in the year 2010 and 2011, and there is also a data that is called National Family Health Survey. Based on these 2 reports, there is a report that has come out now which says that our life expectancy is low community wise as well, right? Even with respect to scheduled caste is 58 and they have grown to 67.8, and another anomaly here, scheduled caste life expectancy of female is less than the scheduled tribes. Again, in the males it is more. So there's so much of anomaly every data when you see here, right? And this data is based upon not all the states, it is based upon these 9 states, and the study which has taken place says that the major reasons for this particular pattern is because of gaps in the various health and nutrition indicators, especially education levels. The education levels in the tribal communities are low, the poverty levels are high, and the traditional lifestyles which were once used to be the traditional way of living for the tribal community, that has changed. Now remoteness of habitats, they started to live in remoteness, so government schemes are not in a position to reach their hamlets. So these are some of the broader dynamics which have been given by the report of research of economics, that is compassionate economics, that has been given, right? Now other than that, firstly let us look into the definition of what exactly is a life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy of birth is nothing but whenever a newborn child comes into this life, then the expectancy of this particular kid, for how long he or she is expected to live, considering the same mortality rate now, that is called life expectancy, right? So it is said that of all the states, Madhya Pradesh has the lowest life expectancy, that is 57.4 years for male and 60.1 years for the female, right? Now let us quickly look into the reasons one by one, right? Firstly, the major reason is the gaps in indicators. What are these gaps in indicators? Whether it is education or health or nutrition indicators, all these 3 indicators the tribal communities have been falling down. Why? It is because of the traditional lifestyles which they used to live, they are no longer in a position to live in the same way. So there is a case study that has been taken. The case study says that when a woman back in 70 years, a 70-year-old woman today, when she was 6 years old, it is said that she has seen 4 generations of life, 4 generations of people living in the same house. But today, the same woman says there are only 3 generations of people they are able to see. It is because earlier the lifestyles of tribal people are completely dependent upon the local foods. First one. Secondly, if you see here, today they are dependent upon the PDS system, and the nature of work which they used to do, it has changed. The nature of work which the tribal people used to do has changed. Now the case study says that earlier a young man of 20-22 years old, back in 40-50 years before, in order to prepare their own food, they used to go to their farm fields and they used to work for their food. Today, the nature of lifestyle, those people who used to get into farms are no longer going into farms, and their lifestyles have changed, and this lifestyles have led to the degradations of their generations. But on the hindsight, this report also tells you that the change in this generational life forms is because of development indicators also. Now what is this development indicators? Firstly, they say that late marriage. Earlier, the marriage here used to be at early. They used to get married at 13, 14. Today, marriage is now being taking place at 18 से लेकर 24, and here many children. Okay. There are many children, maybe one house has 10 to 12 children. Today, 2 to 3 children are the average child per family. So, 10 children, that means the gestation period of woman is very long, right? So, there used to be an age gap. The eldest and the youngest of the same family, of the 10 child family, there can be of 20 years difference or 15 years or difference. So because of that, it is said that before, when the earlier times in the 1950s and 60s, they were able to see more generations. It is because of more number of children. And secondly, if you come and look here, it is said that late marriages, and there is an development of IMR and MMR indicators have been performing well. Right. So if these indicators are performing well, IMR is infant mortality rate. That means when a kid is born, for the next 1 year, what are the chances of survival? That is considered as IMR. MMR is maternal mortality rate, which means when a mother gives birth to the child, what are the chances of the mother losing the life? That is taken per 1 lakh birth rates. Right. Now IMR is taken for every 1000. Earlier it is said that back in 1950s, the IMR rate was more, it is more, and even if you consider the 1990s IMR rate, it was 94.5 for the scheduled tribes. Today it is 45, right? Today it is 45, right? This is, though in spite of increase in the IMR and MMR rates for the tribal communities, till even now there is a 4 years lag of expectancy when the kid is born, right? This is one thing. Now let's come back and see the indicators again. If I ask you what are the reasons for a woman's life expectancy and a men's life expectancy and a woman's life expectancy, women's life expectancy is more as compared to the male's life expectancy. It is said that this is a biological entity, right? By nature itself, by genetically itself, it is said that woman has the tendency to live longer. men has the tendency to live lesser life, right? It is a biological and genetical phenomena, right? Come back and see the reasons again. And the other reason here, if you see the poverty levels of all the communities, if you see, it is the tribal communities which have the highest poverty, right? It is the tribal communities which has the highest poverty as compared to any other community. And not just this tribal community which has low life expectancy as compared to a Hindu population of upper caste, Hindu upper caste. The life expectancy is 72 odd years for women. But look at the Muslim community, that is also 69.4. And if you look into the other backward classes, their life expectancy is also 69. And if you look into the scheduled caste, the life expectancy is 67.8, right? Now you have to question again, why do we have this changes in the life expectancy community wise? It is because access to resources, accessibility to the information, accessibility to the hospitals. This is what the report says. Okay, right? And when it comes to the implementational programs of the government, it is said that the areas of scheduled tribes which are isolated, firstly, as they are isolated, it is very difficult for them to establish the government. It is very difficult for the government to establish the public healthcare centers, community healthcare centers. So the lack of failure in the primary or public healthcare centers and the community healthcare centers which has failed. Again, this is what the report says, right? Had if there is the population, the conditions for the establishment of the primary healthcare centers and the community healthcare centers, at times the tribal hamlets will not meet, because the tribal hamlets are isolated locations, right? Isolated locations, and mostly they live in the hilly areas. As they live in the hilly areas, for them to travel to a public healthcare center which is far away, it is difficult. So for that, what they do, they depend upon these people, they depend upon the traditional medicines, right? They depend upon the traditional medicines. Because of the traditional medicines, at times traditional medicines may not work like the advanced medicines which we consider, right? And when it comes to they visiting the hospitals, the report says that they visit only the primary healthcare centers and not the healthcare centers at the secondary level or the tertiary level, where any big healthcare emergency, when it comes, their ultimate agenda is to go to the primary healthcare centers, and if at all they are not if they do not get well, they live in their homes. This is what the report says, right? Clear? Now it is also said that there are signs of improvement. There are signs of improvement as well. And before we look into the signs of improvement of this life expectancy community wise, tribal community are also experiencing a triple burden. The report also says that triple burden is being experienced by the tribal communities. Now what is this triple burden? Those people who are living in the hamlets, right? Those people who are living in the hamlets, they undergo communicable diseases. Okay. Firstly, communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, right? And thirdly, along with this, there are mental health issues. This report also says that this is the triple burden which is overtaking the life expectancy of the scheduled tribes. One, lack of access to the healthcare facilities. Even if there is access, they only access the primary healthcare centers and not the advanced healthcare centers, in spite of they given the benefits, right? Clear? Now Along with this, it is also said that there are ample bacterial and viral diseases which are very specific to the scheduled tribes communities. So now it also said it is the duty of the government to look into these domains, that is especially the bacterial and the viral diseases, right? So bacterial and viral diseases and skin infections which can spread rapidly, it is now the duty of the primary healthcare centers and the community healthcare centers, which has to identify priorly, which have failed in identifying those diseases, right? Only at the extreme levels they come and reach the primary healthcare centers, right? So apart from this, the report also says that though all these indicators are very bad, but we have moved from a worst stage to a worst phase. A bad phase, say, we are now moving to the developmental phase. So what is this developmental phase? What is this developmental phase? The developmental phase is nothing but when you compare the healthcare indicators of the 1950s, the data which we have taken is only from 1997, but when you compare the healthcare facilities from the 1950s se lekar ab tak, since the independence of India, the government has come up with various programs which are related to the tribal communities. And I have also given you the list of the constitutional provisions which are given to the scheduled tribes. So these constitutional provisions which have been given to the scheduled tribes are also acting as agents for the enhancement of their livelihoods, right? Apart from that, the report said that it has mentioned certain number of government programs which are aided in increasing the life expectancy, directly or indirectly. It is said that the umbrella program for the development of the scheduled tribes, right? Umbrella program for the development of the scheduled tribes, which aids in increasing the tribals in all dimensions. Now what do you mean by all dimensions? Whether it is politically, economically, socially, or in terms of health, the socio-economic welfare will be taken under these programs, right? The National Commission for the Scheduled Tribes have been established. A constitutional status have been given. Article 341, 344, 342, 338, all these have been enshrined to give some special protections. So with the advancement of the government, the involvement of these constitutional provisions and establishment of the primary healthcare centers, we are not far behind. This is what the report says. Along with that, the report also mentions certain other government programs. Those government programs here are that Integrated Tribal Development Project, नर्सरी कम वुमेन वेलफेयर सेंटर्स एस्टैब्लिश किया गया. द मिड डे मील स्कीम्स आर specially given to the tribal communities, in spite of there are 2 students or 3 students. It is a case study that has been done in the Madhya Pradesh. And thirdly, the programs in order to educate since 2002 se lekar 2007, there have been educational programs that have been developed and taken care by the tribe in order to enhance the abilities of the tribal people and get them into the mainstream educational sector or educational services. That is when the change in the tribal communities have come. That is when the change in the tribal communities started, right? Literacy districts have been identified, and along with that, their educational aspects with respect to the socio-economic and political rights have been told to them. So the report has given the list of these schemes. While writing an answer, it would be really good if you can give the reference to that report, right? Now there is a question that has been asked, sir, community healthcare centers means government hospitals? No, government hospitals are different. Community healthcare centers, it is established by the government only, but the community will serve there. right? The community will be serving there. It is a different entity from primary healthcare centers. Primary healthcare centers are government hospitals, which gives you the basic first aid and identifying and diagnosing entities of diseases, right? Clear? Okay, let us once look into this scheme as the report mentions about this scheme. So, umbrella program for the development of the scheduled tribes. Now, what it does, it aids to voluntary organizations working for the welfare and the scheduled tribes, right? And it also aims to develop the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and 10 minimum support price is given to the producing crops which are there in the tribal community, especially those crops which are grown by the tribals, right? And 11 special central assistant programs and for tribal sub schemes have been given under this scheme, right? Along with that, it approved pre-matric scholarship, post-matric scholarship, ashram schools, alag se schools only for tribal people. Along with that, boys and girls hostels, they will be given vocational trainings. Along with that, monitoring and evaluation of these tribal communities will be taken care. Along with that, tribal festivals, tribal research, information and mass education. So, this is a program which aims to develop the tribal community in a foolproof manner, right? It aims to develop the tribal community in a foolproof manner. Clear? Now, community healthcare centers, this is a question that has been asked. What are community healthcare centers? See, community healthcare is nothing but, if you see, for example, you might be aware of local people who can give you certain kinds of healthcare services. Out of their will, they'll come and help you, right? It is not a mandatory entity, it is a voluntary entity. That is called community healthcare centers. But on the hindsight, the primary healthcare centers are meant for, they are aided by the government, they are funded by the government, but community healthcare centers, they are not aided and funded. It is a voluntary organizations, the local people, they recommend their services at a cheaper cost. Maybe some organizations will be tying up with the particular another organization to give healthcare facilities to that particular area, right? It's like a mohalla clinic as well, but mohalla clinics more or less these days in Delhi are run by the government, right? Okay, let us move ahead. Okay, and lastly, let us look into the facts once again. See, it is one state which is Punjab, which has 0% scheduled tribes, right? The 0% scheduled tribes in Punjab. And even if you look into Lakshadweep, 94.8% of tribes are there. If at all you are asked a question, which state has the highest population concentration, the highest population percentage of tribes in, it is your Mizoram with 94%, right? Mizoram with 94% and 94.4, and Union Territory, it is Lakshadweep, right? Union Territory, it's Lakshadweep. Most of the times it is misleading that Andaman Nicobar has large amount of tribal population in terms of percentage. The answer is no. It is 7.5% only of the total population of Andaman Nicobar Islands are scheduled tribes, right? So, these are some of the broad points which are given in that report. So, the questions can be asked in either ways, right? The questions can be asked why there is an increase. Number one, why is the difference between men and women? Though the reasons are not listed in that report, it is up to us. Why is the difference which we found? Now, if you look into the answers, what kind of questions that can be asked? The questions is the differences that can be asked and why do we have, what are the government interventions, whenever the government interventions that can be asked, if it is asked, what you have to do? You have to give reference to these kind of programs and give the credit to the governmental programs, and also give a way forward in such a way so that the development that has taken place has not put the tribal communities at par with the general public. Still there is a need for more effort into the tribal programs that are being run, right? Clear? Our second article, coming to the second article here, the second article talks about it's been 50 years to tomorrow, that is 5th of June, since the Stockholm conference that have taken place. And firstly, I would be asking you, why do you call June 5th as the World Environment Day? Why do you call June 5th as the World Environment Day? Can you name, can you comment it down? Are you aware of it? Why do you call June 5th as the World Environment Day? See, firstly, the June 5th is called the World Environment Day. It is because on 5th of June, 50 years before, we have signed a great conference, that is Stockholm conference, related to the climate change. And it is this conference, for the first time, most of the global community has come together and they have decided that we have to look forward for the climate change, and climate is a greater component and we should not neglect the climate as well, right? And Stockholm is a capital in the Sweden. It is a Swedish capital, and environmentally this is considered to be the capital of environmental reforms, because this is where the reforms started to change the climate, to stop the change in the climate, right? So that is why June 5th is considered to be as the World Environment Day. So in this context, yesterday the Stockholm Plus 50 conference has closed with the urgent environmental economic transactions, right? It has said that it is now time for the developed countries to give certain amount of money to stop the climate change by the developing countries, and there need to be technology given in order to stop the climate change. Now, what is that climate change technology? It is nothing but the ACs which you run, that are run through the HFCs and CFCs. So this HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, the carbon which you emit from the vehicular pollutions, now convert them into electric vehicles, plant more number of trees. At the same time, the technology that will emit the greenhouse gases, now you have to go for those kind of technologies which will reduce the emittance of the greenhouse gases. Clean environmental technologies के लिए जाना चाहिए. But the developing countries, do they have enough money to go for these kind of technologies? Can you ask people in the Africa to stop using the coal for their daily survival? We cannot ask them, because they do not have the resources. So it is the duty of the developed countries, which have actually polluted this entire earth by emitting large amounts of pollution related entities into the atmosphere. It is the same countries we have to take the responsibility. That means the climate change is a problem which is common to everyone, right? It is a common problem, but the responsibilities need to be differentiated. It is called the common but differentiated responsibilities. The climate change aspects which have been talked by the Stockholm Plus 50 has urged that you have to go for economic transactions, right? And in this context, we'll now be looking into the aspects of what the government and what the world has done since the 1952 se lekar 2015 tak, which has major changes that have been brought in the climate change, right? Firstly, back in 1972, when the world's conference has started with respect to the climate change, it is in the 1972. Today, this has led to this particular program where the stepping stones of the climate change has initiated, that has led to, in today's time, 176 countries have their own environmental framework, and 150 odd countries have enshrined environmental protection on the rights to health and environment in their constitution as well. India do also have mentioned about the protection of the environment in the constitution as well. If you know the direct to principles of state policies article, please do mention that, right? And it is said that 164 countries till date have created a cabinet level bodies responsible for the environmental protection. If you look into India, India also do have a separate Ministry of Environment and Forestry and Climate Change. A separate ministry has been set up only to protect the forests, right? Apart from that, India has taken many programs in halting the climate change, and India has promised itself that many reforms which we have taken with respect to climate change. And let us quickly look into the timeline of the climate change programs that have been taken, right? Firstly, if you see, back in the year 1972, it is the United Nations Conference on the Human and Environment, that is United Nations Conference on Human and Environment has taken place, and this is called the Stockholm. After this, there is a program that has been started by the United Nations. And what is this program called? It is United Nations Environmental Program. Under this, there is some funding brought by every country to this program, and protections are taken for the control of the climate change. We have to protect the environment, we have to plant more number of trees, deforestation ko rokna chahiye, afforestation ko badhana chahiye, and the technology changes we started to initiate, right? And after that, we have also thought that protection of this environment, it means that not just protection of the forest, it is also the entities that are living in the forest, that is wildlife, flora, fauna. For that, we have brought in a convention on the international trade in the endangered species. Endangered species are those species which are meant to be less than 250, or their population in the last 10 years has reduced by 70%, right? Those species are called endangered species. For them, those, in order to protect those species, whether it is trees, plants or animals, there is a convention to stop them, that is called Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, right? It is the same entity. Just after 1 year of this conference, India is also one of the founding member for this conference, right? And it is part of the United Nations. Okay. And what did India do here? In 1972, we just started the Project Tiger to protect the tiger. We have started a Project Tiger, right? After we started to protect tiger, we have given fundings to the protection of the tiger, because tiger is considered to be an important species in the forest. If you start to protect the tiger, automatically you will also protect the entire forest area, because tiger is considered to be an umbrella species, right? Umbrella species are those species which are important for the entire forest ecosystem, right? Secondly, if you see, as I told you, we have already bought the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, that is with flora and fauna. And we have also thought that we have to protect those species which are moving from one place to another place, and along with that, we should also protect the entire area when the species move from one place to another place. In India, there will be birds that will be coming all the way from Mongolia to, while traveling to South Africa, they take a halt for a couple of days in India, in Nagaland, and then they'll directly fly to the South Africa. So our species which passes through India plays a major role, right? So if we do not protect this habitat area, don't you think those species will die? So in order to protect those kind of species, what we have done is, the world community has went in for conservation of migratory species of wild animals, and India is also a signatory of this. It is called Conservation of Migratory Species, and it is a binding entity. It is a binding entity. What do you mean by binding? If we do not go for these rules or comply with these rules, there can be sanctions, right? There can be funding that can be stopped for the India that comes through CMS, Convention of Migratory Species. And later, the next year, we started for World Climate Programs, right? And a couple of years later, a General Assembly that has taken place for the protection of the world's nature. There's not much developments took place here, but here 1985, there is a protocol that has taken place. From now on, it is identified that the ozone layer is depleting over a period of time. Ozone layer is depleting. To protect that ozone layer, a convention that has been taken place in Vienna, and this convention has been successful in the year 1987 with the name of Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol is a protocol which talks about the depletion of the ozone substances. That means those substances which go up into the air and degrade the ozone, those substances have been stopped. They have been banned. India also banned all the ozone depleting substances that have been signed in the 1987, right? And immediately after 85 to 87, if you see, there is a disaster that took place in the name of Chernobyl disaster in Russia, right? Nuclear disaster took place. So in order to protect these kind of disasters, we again went in for so many conventions, right? That is, it is said that transboundary movement of hazardous substances, any hazardous substance, if it has to move from one country to another country, they need to give prior informed consent. You have to give information first. This is a hazardous substance. If you open any bottle which is a food item or any chemical item, they will write about what are the hazardous things, right? If it has to move from one country to another country, they have to give prior informed consent, right? And immediately after this, the biggest change that ever took place in the climate change is the establishment of the IPCC. IPCC is nothing but Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change, and this Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change is a body which collects all the information that is related to the climate change. It brings in the scientific principles, it explains the scientific principles, and it tells the global world these are the changes that need to be made. If you don't make these changes, what are the disastrous events that will take place in the world. So today the global forum will look forward for IPCC reports. Why? Because this IPCC report will tell you the impacts the climate change is going to take place, right? Climate change will lead in the next a decade or so, or else the climate change, it is after these efforts of the IPCC, today we are able to target for 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction. We have to stop the increase in temperature by the 2100, the earth's temperature to stop by 1.5 degrees Celsius rise only, right? And there is a question here, Anjali Agarwal, sir, do we need to learn all these conventions? Yes, Anjali, for preliminary examination, any question can be coming from these conventions, right? It is important for you to learn, right? You have to remember the important conventions here, right? And this is all the climate change, and if you know about these conventions, you need not remember any other conventions with respect to the climate change, right? Come back, the first IPCC report was given, and on this there is another conference that took place in 1992. This is called the Rio Earth Summit, and it is the greatest summit which has ever taken, and greatest reforms have come forward in terms of climate change. It gave rise to 3 big conventions. That is, it said that protection of the biological diversity need to be there. That is Convention of the Biological Diversity, right? And this conference is also called as Rio Earth Summit or the Earth Summit, because this has taken place in the year 1992 in Brazil at a place called Rio. That's why it is called Rio Earth Summit, and it gave a framework for the next generation to work on a climate change, that is called UNFCCC, that is United Nations Framework for the Convention on the Climate Change, right? Apart from that, it also said that we have to protect our deserts. We have also need to protect the area from converting a greenery area into a desert area. For that, there is a convention that is called United Nations Convention on Combatification of Deserts, right? After this, again there is a Chemical Weapons Convention, right? Agar koi chemical weapons hai, we have to stop using it. We should not go for chemical weapons even in the warfare time period, right? Right? So the convention for desertification was also signed later, right? And for example, later on in the year 1996, it is said that there should be a certified ISO standards for any industry for its pollution levels to come out, right? And finally, after this, another important protocol that has been signed, and till date this is the extensions of this particular Kyoto Protocol we get to see in the 2015 Paris Agreement, right? This amendments have seen here again, right? Kyoto Protocol, Rotterdam Convention, warmest year of the millennia we got to see in 1988, again a disaster, extensive forest fires in Amazon. So whenever a bigger disaster that you get to see, the reforms will be taken accordingly, right? So here some big conventions are Stockholm Conventions, and it talks about the persistent organic pollutants. Persistent organic pollutants are nothing but once if they come into the atmosphere, they'll stay for really long period of time, they'll stay. They do not degrade. So these kind of organic material are called persistent organic pollutants, and this persistent organic pollutants ko ban karne ke liye this convention is there. This is also binding. And Rotterdam Convention, that is prior informed consent. if any hazardous substance need to be moving from one place to another place, you need to give an informed consent. That country need to be given a consent, right? See, again you get to see a disaster. China overtakes US as the world's biggest emission CO2. So for that we'll come up with the solutions again. So every now and then when we have seen some disasters, there have been some changes, right? Finally, in the year 2013, the convention called Minamata Convention, right? Minamata Convention, it deals with mercury banning. In mercury will no longer be available in a traditional format, right? In order to ban the mercury, we have went in for Minamata Convention. Mercury in other traditional ways, mercury is still used in the thermometers, but to get that mercury you need to go through a special route, right? Pollution of the mercury, which is considered to be one of the dangerous pollution, that we went in for. And finally, in the year 2015, there has been a greatest agreement that has been signed, that is Paris Agreement. In this Paris Agreement, India has pledged so many things to stop the change of the climate change, and here a fund has been raised. That fund name is Global Climate Fund, right? With $100 billion fund that will be given by the developed countries to the developing countries. So India will also be a beneficiary if this fund is a reality, right? But till date the fund has been not collected and it has not been transferred to the developing countries, right? And there have been amendments again in 2016 for the Kigali, that is Kyoto Amendment, that you got to see here. Now in the year 2021 and 2022, if you see, there is a 6th assessment report that has come in, and the 6th assessment report says that by the year 2100 already there will be some islands which will be submerged, and climate refugees will started to move from one place to another place. Climate wars can be seen, resource wars can be seen, and climate change is inevitable. It has asked to go for adaptive methods rather than mitigative methods. Along with the mitigative methods, you should go for adaptive methods, right? Now here there is a question that has been asked by one of our students, that sir, what's the major difference between convention and summit? See, a convention is a place where everyone comes together, sit together and agrees to follow these rules, and there is no written agreement that has taken place and you won't sign it in that convention, right? But when you go back to India, when you come back to India and sign a legal agreement, you make a constitutional provisions to that act, right? Then it will come to a protocol, right? Clear? Convention is just a convention. That means, okay, if you say something, I'll say yes, but I won't sign an agreement. When all the countries come together and sit together, then they have a convention. That is called a convention. At times, these conventions can go back to their countries and they can sign, right? Then that will be a legally binding entity, right? So these are some of the major changes since the formation of the 1972's Stockholm. So it is 50 years since now, and tomorrow is World Environment Day. In the next coming week, it is very much expected you get to see every now and then these conventions, and it is also very important for your prelims to remember all these conventions, right? Now what is mitigative and adaptive methods? This is a question that has been asked by Amulya. See, a mitigative is nothing but to reduce the impact of the disaster, right? There is a disaster that is coming. In order to reduce the impact of the disaster, you will face the disaster but with a lesser intensity if you take certain kinds of steps. That is called mitigation. Adaptation means the disaster will come and you will start to learn to live with the disaster. For example, the Japanese started to live with the earthquakes. Earthquakes are very common there. So in order to adapt to those earthquakes, what did they do? They started to build their buildings in such a way it can resist to the earthquake, right? They started to adapt. That is called adaptation. Mitigation means you will face the disaster with lesser intensity, right? The disaster's intensity will be reduced. And if you look into the India's achievements in terms of climate change and what are the programs that India is running, it is very important for us because the dimensions of questions can be from these angles also. Firstly, India recent times में in order to reduce the emissions, since April 20 we already started BS6 norms. BS6 norms are norms for the vehicles, right? And we have converted the entire lights which were earlier to be part of we have converted the entire lights, that is in the name of smart cities vehicle. Just a minute guys. Okay, got it. So what we have done is we have converted our sodium lamps into LED lamps, because LED lamps consume less energy. It consumes less energy, and sodiums, it consumes more energy. That means we have to generate more energy from, if sodium lamps we are using in the streets and elsewhere across India, they use more energy. That means for that we have to burn more coal to generate the electricity from the thermal power plants. In order to fight that, now we went in for LED, right? And earlier coal was something which was used to burn, and the wood was used to burn and make the food in the most of the tribal hamlets and most of the interior parts of India. Now with the scheme called Ujala LED, we have given BPL families cooking stove and cylinder free of cost, because of which the health indicators of the women also increased, and we now stop to burn the coal and the other organic feed to get the daily needs, right? And India also started a program called National Action Plan on the Climate Change. Under this we have come up with 8 major programs. I will also see what are those 8 major programs, and we have also going for electric efficiency, energy efficient methodologies, and we have also went in for the reduction in the emissions intensity of pollution levels, of contributions of pollution. To tackle that, we are targeting to reduce the GDP also, right? The GDP levels, with the reduction in the emission intensity of the GDP by 33 to 35% from by 2030 from 2005 levels, right? It means to say that the contribution will be less from the pollution, right? And we have also went in for creation of additional carbon sinks by planting more number of trees. By planting more number of trees, we can sink in the more amount of carbon, we will get more clean energy. So these are the programs which India has undertaken. Along with that, the National Action Plan on the Climate Change, if you see, India has 8 mission programs to tackle the climate change, that is listed here, right? So this is the story of the climate change and India, all the programs. Along with this, from the preliminary point of view, what you have to understand is these important programs which are started by which ministry. This is the National Action Plan. National Action Plan on Climate Change are these, right? These are the National Action Plan on the Climate Change programs. In this, a solar mission is by the Ministry of Natural and Renewable Energy, and National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency, it is by Ministry of Power. Ministry of Urban Development has went in for sustainable housing. Sustainable housing means we should develop the housing in such a way it will have the water inlets, water outlets. Along with that, rainwater harvesting will be taking, that will be supported by the Ministry of Urban Development. National Water Mission, this National Water Mission is by the Ministry of Water and Resources. National Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem, in order to protect the Himalayas, the Ministry of Science and Technology has roped in to go for sustainable housing, and what are the plantations that need to be taking place across the slopes in order to protect those landslides, right? And there are a couple of other programs with the name of National Mission for a Green India. This National Mission for Green India is under the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And lastly, the Agricultural Ministry has taken up the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture. So these are various programs which are part of your static syllabus also, that will be covered in your climate change, but the questions can be asked from the preliminary point of view, right? Which ministry has which portfolio to deal with, right? Clear? Now this is the story of the climate change since the 1952, and it is very important for you to remember all of these protocols. Question can come from any area, and it is definitely you get to see one question in the preliminary examination from these areas, at least one question I am talking about, right? And this PPT will be shared in the Raj Malhotra IAS Telegram channel immediately after the class, so please make sure to download it from there. So our last article is an interesting article, right? The interesting article here is there is a plant which is considered to be the largest plant in the world, which is 180 kilometers in length and 150 kilometers spread. Such is the large plant, and it is said that it is a single plant. All these days we have thought that the biggest tree or the biggest plant in this world was present in the United States in the name of colonial colony of quaking aspects, right? But today we have realized that the biggest plant in the world is the ribbonweed, which is found in the Australia's western coast in the Shark Bay, right? So in this article, this is a factual article, but for our examination what we have to understand is this plant, the plant is a polyploid plant, right? It is a polyploid. Now what is a polyploid? Polyploid is something which do not reproduce. It will not use its seeds for the reproduction. It cannot reproduce. It will not mate. But still this plant has the potential to grow for almost 180 kilometers in length and 150 kilometers widespread. Now how did we get to know that this is a single plant? Recently there is a study that has been done, and in that study the scientists have planned to study the weeds across the Australia. When they planned to study these weeds across the Australia, they got to learn that the weeds, whatever they have collected in a very large span of area, all do have the same genetic material, and it has been now declared the entire plant is a single plant. Now this single plant, if you see, it is as big as the length from Pune to Mumbai, and it is within the sea, right? And it is called a sea grass or seaweed. Okay? So from the examination point of view, you have to understand what is the seaweed, what is the seagrass, right? And in India, do we have any seaweed or seagrass? We have to look for these kind of points. Apart from that, what are the ecological impacts of these seaweeds, right? And in India, the largest tree, if you see, it is in West Bengal with the name of the Great Banyan Tree in the Howrah Botanical Garden covers, right? It is at a stretch of, it is as big as 1.41 acres, and this one is almost the distance from Mumbai to Pune, right? Mumbai to Pune, and this is just 1.1 acre, and this is a tree, this is a plant, right? So let's look into the important aspects with this plant. Firstly, it is a 4,500-year-old plant, and it is still not died, and it is not mating too. But how did this plant develop? How did this plant develop and survived so many climate change phenomena since the 4,500 years? Our 4,500 years means this is the evolutionary time period of the Indus Valley civilization since long. And I've told you this is the polyploid. Polyploid is nothing but we generally get the genes from mother and father. Any plant will get the genes from mother and father, half from mother and half from father, right? Half from father and half from mother. But this polyploid means 100% genes will be taken from mother and 100% genes will be taken from father. That means it now has 200% of genes, right? It has both the genes, 100% genes, and this type of plantations are called polyploid, right? Polyploid. So this seagrass weed is a polyploid, right? And it's kept spreading through rhizomes. Now what is the rhizome? Rhizome is nothing but whenever a plant spreads through its roots, okay? It spreads through its roots, then it is called a rhizome spread, right? And if you look into the importance of this particular plant or seaweed or seagrass, they perform a very vital role in the environment. What vital roles do they provide? They provide a home to the very large number of organisms. Okay? Very large number of organisms started to live in that. And secondly, it is a grass, seagrass, right? It's a weed. And these grasses, they give out the oxygen and take in the carbon dioxide. So it will sink the carbon dioxide present in the atmosphere, and they help in maintaining the global climate change, right? And these seagrasses, they are present within the earth, within the ocean, so any kind of erosion that takes place, they will act as a barriers, right? They'll prevent the water getting from muddy, they prevent the water very clean, because of which it will be home to many large number of species, right? And the fact with respect to India, does India have any seaweeds or seagrasses? India do have many number of seagrasses, and it is now time for us to understand and study the seagrass. Are they of the same age or are they of a different species? So in India, if you see, there are more than seaweeds of 844 species, and our seagrasses, seaweeds are different, seagrasses are different. Seagrass can be sometimes a good grass, sometimes a bad grass. So whenever there is a weed, weed is nothing but which spreads very rapidly, and it is not a productive entity for that ecosystem. We have 844 species of weeds across India, right? Now the species, if you see, there is so much of diverse of species of sea grasses in India itself. So your seagrass is found even in Gulf of Kutch, they are also found in Lakshadweep Islands, Andaman Nicobar also, and Chilka Lake, along with that Palk Bay and Gulf of Mannar, right? So mostly, if at all any questions are there, the questions can be from what is a polyploid, what is a rhizome, and how this plant grow, does it grow with weed mating or without mating, right? So if at all this plant has the ability to survive such a long period, that means it is a plant which we need to study for the climate change as well, right? Right? Clear? Now there is a question, what is a seaweed? Seaweed is nothing but a non-useful plant which will actually destroy the ecosystem of that particular area if at all there is a native plant systems. Clear? Weed is nothing but, suppose when you grow any kind of plantation, some small grasses grow up, they are also considered to be weeds, right? Right? And I hope you are clear with whatever we have explained here. If you have any doubts, please let me know. I will be clarifying your doubts. Okay, good. So thank you guys. See you again on next Saturday. We'll be coming up more relevant articles with respect to the UPSC, and all the best for those students who are giving their examination. All the best. You have done all the hard work, whatever you have to do, and it is time for you to sit calmly, relax, and give your examination with a full clear mind, right? All the best guys. See you next week.